Hey everybody, welcome to the page. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Brett Kelly. I'm a strength and conditioning coach for about the last 15 years. Been working with some pro teams, worked with the Chicago White Sox, the St. Louis Cardinals. I worked at St. Louis University, interned with Lindenwood University, and then most recently I was with the U.S. ski team as the head coach for half pipe and free ski. And so if you watch the X Games or the Olympics, those skiers that are throwing themselves in the air doing flips, those are the ones that I had to try to help keep healthy and then help rehab once they inevitably got injured. Now I'm working here for a site in St. Louis. It's an Exos performance site. So I take a lot of my background in strength and conditioning, what I learned from my mentors, what I learned just from trial and error, and then obviously the Exos methodology as well, and try to bridge those together and make my programming. So hopefully you guys enjoy this. If you like it, please share it. Please subscribe below. Next, we're going to be talking about just motor recruitment. We're going to be talking about force velocity curves and contrast training, how it can help increase power. So enjoy. All right, so the first examples I want to talk about when I'm talking about contrast training is just general contrast training, right? So when we're moving some kind of heavy load, and by heavy I mean something above 80% of your max is what I consider heavy, what the research is considered heavy, and then go ahead and do a fast-paced movement that's going to be a similar movement pattern. So what I'm going to show you today is we're basically going to do just 2 reps of what I consider a heavy trap bar deadlift, and then just a counter movement jump. So I would say this is probably the most basic type of contrast training, something you could easily implement into a program to try to help some of that power output. So real quickly, going through trap bar deadlift, we're just thinking 2 reps, something nice and heavy. Coming straight back out and then going straight into some counter movement jumps or some kind of jump where that pattern is very similar. Sticking that landing. Again, since we're working on power, we're keeping those reps nice and low. There's different forms of contrast training too. So French contrast training is a very popular form of contrast training. For something like that, we're actually going to be doing 4 exercises. Okay, so we're working that whole force velocity curve on this. And I'll talk about force velocity curve and the science of muscle recruitment a little bit at the end here. So stick around if you're interested in that. But overall, the practical side of this thing, you're going to be moving something heavy with something that's then over speed training, right? So something moving faster than what we can. So we're both extremes of the force velocity curve. Slow and strong, very fast, very light, extra light actually. So example of that will be back to that deadlift, and then I'm gonna use this band up here. We're gonna do what I call over speed jumps, okay? So same thing as a kind of movement jump. Move this. Move this out of the way. So same thing as a counter movement jump, pulling that band in, so it's going to take some force off the ground, so you can go a little higher here. So once again, doing that heavy load and then going straight into that overspeed training, getting both parts of that force velocity curve. Now with French contrast, we'll do those back to back, rest about a minute, and then we'll go and we'll do something kind of in between both of those. So we'll do a loaded jump and then a regular plyometric jump. So again, if we're working on this movement pattern, I would just do like a dumbbell or empty trap bar, probably no more than 20% of your max. Jump, drop, back into jumps, and then rest, okay? So that's gonna be the overall pattern for French contrast training. Like I said, you don't have to do that full contrast. If you have the time, it's great. Most of the time when I'm training people, either don't have the time or they don't really have the experience to get everything out of that. So I'm gonna focus more on that general strength and general plyometrics. If I'm doing something where I'm working on eccentric phase maybe, working on loading, we can think, let's do eccentric trap bar, where I'm going a little lighter, slow on the way down, and partner that up with, again, a similar movement like a depth drop where I'm stepping off a box, sticking that landing, okay? So now we're working the same thing, but in that eccentric plane, right? Or that eccentric pattern. So those are just some examples. Again, I'm gonna talk about, what is muscle recruitment and that force velocity curve just here in a sec. All right, now to get into muscle recruitment a little bit, some more of the science behind things. Don't worry about my terrible drawing of a bicep here and my terrible drawing of everything else. So muscle recruitment, if I'm doing a bicep curl, for instance, right? I gotta recruit that muscle and enough muscle to move whatever weight I'm trying to up and pull up to. Now your body's gonna try to utilize as little amount of possible muscle as it can to have that curl happen or have that muscle contraction happen. So we have those nerves going from the spine wherever to the muscle. So in this instance, to the bicep, right? If I'm moving a load that's 10 pounds, I'm just trying to recruit just as much muscle as I need to move that 10-pound load, right? So if I look over here, we have our smaller, slower muscle units, okay? Again, when I'm moving lighter load, which is why we can move them more often, like when I'm running long distance versus sprinting or lifting a weight. So I can do those more, but they're gonna be weaker, obviously, and a little bit smaller, which is why they're weaker. As I'm trying to lift a heavier weight or be more powerful, have more intent in that movement, I'm gonna need more muscle, greater muscle recruitment, okay? So it'll actually go and recruit greater muscle units. So you can see as we get that muscle recruitment up, these are getting bigger, they're getting more powerful, they're getting more what we call type 2 muscle fiber or faster twitch muscle fibers, okay? So what we're doing with contrast training is what we're really doing is kind of tricking the body to get to these bigger muscle units before we go do our plyometric jump, okay? So even with plyometrics with jumping, your body's gonna only utilize what it thinks you need to get to that max jump height. So if we can get it to utilize bigger recruited muscles or more type 2 muscles and then go to those jumps and it's primed for that, it's gonna be a lot more powerful of a jump. And this is backed by research and everything. So if we go do something heavy, again, 80% of your max, let's say we're underneath 80% of our max. Let's say, I don't know, we're at 40% of our max and we're only using these muscle fibers. And then we go over and jump. Maybe we'll recruit another one, right? But if we're using 80% of our muscle units, or 80% of our max, we're using more motor units, we're right here. And now we go over, we're gonna use that little bit bigger of that muscle recruitment. So you can think of it as just like priming the muscles for that jump pattern, okay? So now when I talk about the French contrast, I talked about force velocity curve a little bit here. Yep, did that backwards. Okay, so as your force is high, so this is force, this is velocity, okay? I'm gonna move this in a little bit so you guys can see. There we go. So as your force is nice and high right here, let's say right here, so we're moving a heavy load, 80% of your max, something like that, something very heavy. We're moving that very slow, right? Okay, so that's gonna be that trap bar that I showed you earlier. Down over here is gonna be that overspeed stuff. So not a lot of force. In fact, with that trap bar, or with that banded jump, it's actually gonna be lighter than our body weight, right? So not a lot of actual force, but the velocity is very high, okay? And then as we go through this, we wanna make sure we're trying to hit that whole force velocity curve during that power training. So those other ones we were talking about right here, let's say, and I'm just guessing where these are, obviously. Right here is gonna be more that dumbbell jump or something more powerful with weight. You can think of like Olympic lifting in this sense. And then we're getting to those plyometrics down over here where we're still at a light load. We're not in that overspeed load. That velocity is high, but it's not as high as overspeed or something that's sprinting. So you can see why utilizing, French contrast or regular contrast really helps with power development. And this is something, that you want to make sure you're utilizing later stages of training for somebody. So if you have a youth athlete or an athlete that's not very used to strength training, let's build that general strength first before we start implementing contrast training. That doesn't mean we can't implement plyometrics, but I wouldn't necessarily partner them up, okay? Another thing to think about when we're programming this stuff, rep schemes, keeping those reps low like we're doing a power set. So if we were doing, power cleans or even plyometrics by themselves, what would your rep scheme be? Probably, 2 to maybe 4 reps, something that you can recover a lot from, and then having a lot of rest in between, okay? So again, those two movements can be back to back because you're trying to recruit that muscle, but then having a lot of that rest in between. So hopefully you guys can take some of this into your programming, and enjoy it, play around with it, see how you like it for yourself, and then put that into some of your athletes' programs. All right, guys, thanks for listening to me ramble about things that I love talking about and I love teaching people about. If you learned something, if you enjoyed it, go ahead and give me a like, share, subscribe. I appreciate it. And then also, if you have questions, anything you want to learn about just from my experiences, I'm happy to do a video on it. Go ahead and just comment below. I'll check them out and see what we can do. Thanks.